Hoop 7 proudly brings to you Basketball Hustle.
Ellis fumbled the ball. 2 on the shot clock. Goes up a prayer. Yes! As he was falling to the ground, it's a 3. He shot it literally from the hip.
Definitely a highlight.
Here come the Billikens. 4 on 2. McCall. Ellis. Left corner.
We're missing out.
Bang! From way down under. Cody Ellis. Reddick brings low out away from the basket. Stolen away by Cody Ellis. One man to beat. To the hole. He's fouled. Layup. Good. Whistle foul. Count the basket.
Ellis for the reverse. Through fingertips. What a move. Ellis drops in a bomb.
I love seeing Cody Ellis coming out feeling good.
Ellis. Cody Ellis. Ellis. Pull-up jumper. Cody Ellis. Bang. Cody Ellis, can he stand and deliver? Cody Ellis.
Now it's time for another episode of Hoops Heaven's Basketball Hustle.
Hello and welcome to Hoop 7's Basketball Hustle for another week. And finally, Cody, we're only days away from the championship series in the NBL starting. It's been a long build-up and a long break, but in between we've had some FIBA World Cup qualification matches. The World Cup teams are all set now for the World Cup later this year, and it's fascinating Boomers' performances, but also what the Tall Blacks did without any New Zealand Breakers players to conclude their qualification phase was impressive as well. And I want to get your thoughts on South Sudan and their contingent of NBL players as well, Cody. So we'll get through all of that on this week's show. We'll have a touch back on the semi-final series where we ended up seeing both the Sydney Kings and the New Zealand Breakers overcome the Cairns Taipans and the Tasmania Jack Jumpers to set up the championship series that now gets underway on Friday night. We've got another new coach that's required across the league with Simon Mitchell standing down from the South East Melbourne Phoenix. So there's a lot for us to get through, Cody. We're here thanks to Hoop 7. Thanks for joining me once again. And finally, we're only days away from that championship series.
Yeah, it's about time. It's been a long couple of weeks, really. And look, for the two teams playing, I'm sure they've not really enjoyed this 2 weeks. You know, it's good to sit and enjoy that, you know, you've made a grand final series, but to sit 2 weeks and not be able to play is not great. And I expect the first game to probably show that a bit and be a bit sloppy, and I hope it's not. I hope they prove me wrong. But usually with a couple of weeks off, I think both these teams have proven that it's not great for them.
The Breakers are used to it. Yeah. Is the only positive. But the last time they did have a big break, they took a while to warm up again. So it's going to be fascinating, like you said, to see how they do come out. And it starts on Friday night at Kudos Bank Arena with Game 1. And then all of a sudden it's only 2 days until Game 2 in Auckland on Sunday. And then we've got another 5 days in between for Game 3. But that's all to come ahead. And we'll do a full preview as this show unfolds this week, Cody. We're here, of course, as always, thanks to Hoop 7. So if you need anything basketball related, head to hoop7.com.au, or if you are in Perth and you're willing to brave the heat right now, Cody, head on to Murray Street and go into the store, and you won't be disappointed.
No, not at all. I was in there the other day, grabbed myself a pair of shoes and
a new pair for this season.
Probably not. More just to train in for the time being, and then don't worry with a few of the new releases coming out. Don't worry, I'll be in there very soon.
Anything for Chase?
There will be. He's starting to kick back into basketball soon, so I will be popping in there to get him a pair. All
right, Cody, a lot to get through. We'll hear from the Nightmare, Matty Knight, as well, and get his thoughts on the championship series, and he's always opinionated about what's happening to the Perth Wildcats as well, so we'll get his thoughts on that, and also looking back on the semi-final series. So we'll hear from Matty a little bit later. But before we get to some of the news around the league, and I guess with the World Cup qualifiers, Cody, we'll go into it in more depth, but do you feel like we've got the best two teams now for the championship series with the Kings and the Breakers?
Yeah, we do. We do. These are probably been two of the more consistent teams all year, and prove that they've probably got a higher ceiling than every other team in the league. So yeah, look, I'm happy it's come down to these two, because I think this is going to be a heck of a series.
No, it will be, and we'll break it down later on, and we'll go through all the matchups, and I'll hold you to a prediction as well, Cody. We'll get that percentage of how you've gone throughout the season at some point as well, and see how you've gone. But you might be able to get a championship series prediction correct. Now, a couple of weeks ago, we talked about Justin Schuller being appointed the new coach of the Brisbane Bullets, and now it's the South East Melbourne Phoenix who need a new coach, Cody. I'll go through some of the candidates a bit later, but what was your first reaction when you found out that Simon pretty much made the decision himself to not, I guess, seek a reappointment?
Yeah, look, I think in that last press conference, I think you kind of saw how defeated and deflated he was. It's been a massive few years for them because they just have not been able to stay healthy, so, and that's got to be frustrating. And look, I think he's done a decent job with them. He's done a really good job considering all the outs. And look, I think it's one of those things that it really just wears on you mentally. So I think he probably had that decision made up during that press conference already. So
I think by that point, if you're not excited for the future and if you're not fully invested in it, I think it's a pretty good sign that it probably is the right time.
Oh, for sure. And look, you saw Mitch Creek come out and advocate for him and really wanted him back because, he seems very much like a player's coach. Yep. And, they've spoken to a lot of the guys in that squad and they've all really wanted him back. But look, I think maybe something new and fresh is probably good for them. Yep. So it's going to be interesting to see who they appoint.
I'll go through some of those options as well, and I still think there's a genuine chance that with the owners that they have, that they pluck someone completely out of left field that we don't know about as well. But I will go through some potential candidates with you later on. Some more movement of the Brisbane Bullets. So Justin Schuller has been appointed as of a couple of weeks ago. He's now brought with him from Melbourne United Daryl McDonald. Yep. Sam McKinnon is a fascinating story. He's now out of a job altogether, having chosen his GM job over being the coach for the rest of the season. He's now been relieved of his duties from that job. Peter Crawford and Pero Cameron also relieved of their duties. DJ Mitchell is one player that they have re-signed, so they've now got 3 players on their books with Aaron Baines and Nathan Sobey as well. Are you as baffled by the things happening at the Bullets as I am?
Yeah, a little bit. There seems to be no rhyme or reason to what they're doing right now. And they're probably really a club in need of some direction. Yeah. And it's been very odd so far. But they've got a lot of work to do because, like you mentioned, only 3 players signed. Yep. And look, it's going to be interesting. It's going to be a massive next few months for them.
No, it will be. We'll keep an eye on that with great interest. So the reason we had a break in between the end of the semi-final series and before the championship series, Cody, was because of the FIBA window. So the last games for the World Cup qualifiers, so the World Cup will be played later this year, starting late August, I think, and it's spread across Japan, Indonesia and the Philippines. But the Boomers had already qualified. It's fascinating that we had to have a break before the grand final series, but no players from the Sydney Kings were playing for the Boomers. No Breakers players played for the Tall Blacks, but I guess it just is what it is, and we have to accept that it was just the way it had to be. But the Boomers wins against Bahrain and Kazakhstan. I'm not sure there's anything really to talk about except for what Todd Blanchfield did and what he did to remind everybody what he's still capable of.
Oh, absolutely, and he was awesome. He was just aggressive and just out there playing free. He was probably excited that he actually got to play some minutes. That was probably the big thing. Yep. But no, look, it was really good to see, and I think that he kind of reminded a few people around the country that he's still a legitimate scorer and can play at the top level. Yeah,
31 points he scored in that second game on Sunday against Kazakhstan. That was the best performance from a Boomer since what Paddy Mills did in the bronze medal game. Yep. And it was more points than he scored in the last 17 games of the entire NBL season, Cody. What do you think it says about his future? I mean, what does he do? He's still contracted for 2 years at the Perth Wildcats. Does he try to ride it out and try to win the faith of John Riley, or does he take what would be a bold move and ask out of that contract and try to find a home where he'll actually play?
It's a tough one, but I mean, you've seen him come out and say that he wants to be part of the Cats.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
But it's a really tough one. And look, going through all the preseason and the grind of that, and then finally being able to play games and not playing is not good for your mental health. I'll tell you that much. Especially for a player of his level. Yeah. And look, he didn't have the best year when he was playing early on, but he's still got that potential to be a game changer. Yeah. And I think it's tough, and it's going to depend on what really does with the squad this year, whether Toddy will fit into that, and it is a tough one. But I mean, look, I think he does want to stay, and why wouldn't you?
Yep.
But yeah, it's going to be interesting to see if he decides to opt out and and try test the waters a bit, because there's a few opportunities around.
I look across the league and I think there's some obvious systems where he would immediately fit. The Tasmania Jack Jumpers to me look to be one where I feel like Scott Roth in a structured environment would absolutely get the best out of Todd Blanchfield. I feel like going back to Illawarra, he would be a perfect fit there just to provide that cool, experienced head and an outside shooter, especially now with Tim Conrad gone. That would be a good fit for him, I think. And I think there's a chance that even going to the Cairns Taipans, where Adam Ford loves his team to shoot three-pointers, that might be a good fit for him. I see some options there, but if you're the Wildcats, are you willing to let him out of his contract? Or do you only let him out of his contract if he doesn't play in the NBL? It's going to be fascinating how both sides approach it.
Yeah, it's a tough one. And look, I think if they're going to be reluctant to let him out of the contract, I don't think that's, really good for either party.
Sure.
If you're going to have a guy like that contracted and know that he's not going to play, what's the point? I don't think that's good for either. And I mean, look, there is a chance that he could play on that Cats team, but I mean, you even look at, like we mentioned, Brisbane, for example. Yep. I mean, they're going to start needing some firepower as well, and I'm sure they're willing to throw some money around. And I think Tassie is probably an interesting one, like you mentioned, but he's following Clint around again, and I'm sure Clint wouldn't exactly enjoy that too much. So no, there is options for him, and I think if they know that he's probably not going to play, or at least play significant minutes, like I think he should, I don't see why they would hold him back.
Yeah, I don't see anything changing, especially if they upgrade Michael Harris to a full contract, and if both Webster brothers are back, and if Bryce Cotton is back. I don't see why it changes from this season. No,
I don't see it changing a whole lot either. And look, realistically, the Cats probably need more on the defensive end than the offensive end. And yeah, it's a tough one. It is a tough one, and I hope they do the right thing.
All right, we'll all we can do is wait and see what transpires there. But I actually wouldn't be surprised if someone like Japan might end up being a really good option for him. We've seen how well Angus Brand and Nick Kay and Reece Vague and a whole host of guys have done over there, and it might be a good option for him, and it might even freshen him up and rejuvenate him as well. But the New Zealand Tall Blacks as well, Cody. They didn't have any of their breakers players, but they have qualified for the World Cup, and they're coached by Pero Cameron. And I putting down their potential World Cup squad with Stephen Adams, Yanni Wetzel, Sam Wardenberg, Finn Delaney, Tom Abercrombie, Corey and Ty Webster, Isaac Fotu, Shea Ili if he's healthy, Flynn Cameron, and then you might be able to fill out the squad with someone like a Ruben Tarangi or Isaiah Liafa. Things in New Zealand basketball are pretty strong right now. If you have a look at that potential Tall Black squad, adding that the Breakers are in a championship series right now, that's pretty exciting.
Oh, absolutely. They've got a good crop of young guys coming through as well, and it's really good to see. And I think, on the world stage, they can certainly be competitive. They're one of those teams that always plays hard and probably plays harder than any other country, and it's kind of what they hold their hat to. And that's a really exciting looking squad on paper.
South Sudan is another one, Cody. They had a fascinating week in the end. So the African qualifiers, every country still had 3 more games to play to close the qualification phase, and it was all played in Egypt, and I feel for them. So South Sudan had a lot of supporters travel with them to go to Egypt, and they weren't allowed into the building to support their team. But I guess that's the politics of the region, and there's a lot that goes into that. But what I do like about South Sudan is we've got a lot of players now in the NBL that have come from that region, largely as refugees, but for whatever reason, they have made their new home in Australia. But I love the fact that a lot of these guys are so excited to represent their nation, and how excited and passionate they are to now help them into the World Cup. They're going to be a really exciting team to watch later this year at the World Cup. And I mean, you have a look at someone like a Sunday Detch, who's a leader on that team. Bull Kowal, fresh off playing for the Cairns Taipans, and Majuk Deng. Both of those guys were quickly to jump on the plane and go and play. They could still add someone like a Joe Luala-Chul back into that team for the World Cup. And pretty much every team in the league right now just about has at least one player from South Sudan. You've got a former teammate, Majuk as well, Cody. It's pretty exciting.
It is. It really is. And look, seeing those scenes with their crowd not allowed into the game was not fun to see. And look, like you said, gets very political over there, and we'll try to steer well clear of all that. But no, look, again, exciting times ahead for South Sudan, and very cool to book their place into the first World Cup ever, I think. And,
absolutely is, yeah.
And that's awesome. That's really good. And they're going to cause some problems. I guarantee it.
How exciting is it that players like this have found a home in the NBL or NBL 1 as well, right across the country, but they go back to play for their country? I mean, you know some of these guys very well. You played with them at the Senators. How much do you feel like it means to them?
Oh, it means a lot. You know, getting to represent your country is amazing. And to be able to do it to an up-and-coming, you know, what looks like an up-and-coming bit of a powerhouse.
Yeah. I think they're the youngest nation officially in the world still.
Yeah, and that's awesome. And to be able to be, you know, one of the first representatives of your country, and especially on the world stage like that, I think is massive. Yeah. So I'm sure they're all full of pride and ready to go and show people what they're made of. All
right, Cody, we'll take a break and then we'll go back and have a look at the semi-final series. But if you had to put your neck on the line at the World Cup later this year, where do the Boomers finish?
Ooh, it's a tough one. It's going to depend on who plays.
Yes.
It's so hard to see.
Do they win a medal?
Yeah, I think so. I do think so. I think they medal, but like I said, it's going to be interesting to see what their roster is. And look, I mean, either way, whatever team we put on the floor is usually fairly competitive. So I hope so.
Where do the Tall Blacks finish?
It's a tough one. I think, look, it's...
20 years ago, they finished fourth at a World Cup. Can they go anywhere close to that?
Look, I think they could go close. But again, I think it just comes down to the fact that some of these other countries are just so deep and really put pretty much their full squads into these. So
amazing that Argentina didn't even qualify.
I know, that is wild. And that's just proof of how good the World Cup is. If a team like Argentina doesn't qualify, you know, a real top nation in the world, in the basketball world. And so it's going to be competitive. I think they do really well. I think it'll be tough for them to push for that top four, but I think they can go close.
I think a top 10 finish is a good result for them. Yeah. What about South Sudan? It's really hard to know, but again, they could push for top 10.
I think so. I think they can. I think they're going to shock some people because I think some countries are going to come out thinking they'll breeze past them, and they're certainly not going to. So I do think that they'll shock some people, and top 10 would be amazing for them.
All right, Cody, let's take a deep breath, and when we come back, we'll have a look back on how we got to the championship series with the Kings beating the Taipans and the Breakers beating the Jack Jumpers.
Sounds good.
Okay, I'm back here with Cody Ellis on Hoop 7's Basketball Hustle. Cody, it almost feels like a lifetime ago that our last NBL action took place, and we saw the end of the playoff series between the Kings and the Taipans, and then the Breakers and the Jack Jumpers. Both series ended up going to 3 games. No team ended up winning on the opponent's home floor. Let's start with the Kings and the Taipans, because this was a fascinating series. What we saw in Game 2 was the Kings lose their cool a little bit. It looked like they might have lost Xavier Cooks for the rest of the series as well, with an ankle injury. Chase Buford ends up getting ejected late in the game. Tim Suarez attacks Sam Wardenberg with his shoulder and somehow ends up being able to play Game 3 as well. But, I mean, I think the biggest talking point out of this series was the difference in the way the series was officiated from Game 2 to Game 3, because it was a totally different game in that Game 3, because the Kings had been called, I think, for probably 4 or 5 flop calls in the first 2 games of the series. Then all of a sudden, they were still, I think it's fair to say they were still flopping, but all of a sudden they were rewarded for it. Yeah. And the foul calls going against the Taipans just completely changed that game, especially in the first half. And I think the Taipans were officiated out of the game in a lot of ways. And full credit to the Kings, they deserve to win, but the difference from Game 2 to Game 3, and I think what Chase Buford got out of that ejection was a bit of a masterstroke.
Oh, for sure. And look, I have no doubt that was kind of playing on his mind as well to rant and rave and look, he wanted to get kicked out. He wanted to get kicked out. You saw that. I think he was actually
walking to the locker room before he even got ejected. Right. Yep.
And I think it was one of those things that he kind of knew that things weren't really going their way, so it was, kind of sacrificed that game to kind of sway them a bit for Game 3. And I mean, look, the Kings were aggressive in Game 3. They were really aggressive, and I think that it was frustrating to see the whistle played such a big role in the series, and especially the deciding game. You know, you saw two completely different series refed.
Yep.
I think, you know, this Kings-Cairns one was very whistle heavy, and the Jack Jumpers in New Zealand one was a lot more physical and a lot more playoff-like. Yep. So it's going to be interesting to see what the grand final series is like.
As a positive for the Sydney Kings, I think their biggest threat going to Game 3 was if DJ Hogue caught fire for the Taipans and played match winner. But I don't know if we've seen a better defensive performance than what we saw from Justin Simon on DJ Hogue in that game. Obviously, Simon didn't win the NBL's Defensive Player of the Year award, but on this show, the votes from Damien Martin, he was a clear winner, and I think he absolutely showed why in that Game 3.
Oh, absolutely. And, you know, there's a reason I picked him for preseason as well. Yep. So, look, he was just awesome. He did exactly what he was needed to do. Just sat in DJ's pocket and didn't leave him alone. He had trouble breathing, let alone trying to get to the rack or shooting an open three. But that's what he was there for. You know, that's what he's there for, and that's he just played his role perfectly.
So, silly question, Cody, but if you're the Sydney Kings, if one player from the Taipans had to take 17 shots for that game, would you rather it be DJ Hogue or Tajir McCall?
Yeah, Tajir McCall every day of the week. You know, I think especially not a Tajir McCall that's not 100%
with a sore shoulder.
So, look, I think they kind of baited him to shoot, and you know he bit on it, and
he goes 3 of 17.
Yeah, and that hurts. You know, that does hurt. So. I think that, you know, Cairns put up a fairly good fight. You know,
absolutely.
And I really think that towards the end of that game, they just ran out of steam.
Well, they lost Shannon Scott, so I mean, he's been potentially the best floor general in the competition this season. He's been outstanding as their point guard, but just as they got McCall back for the last 2 games, they lost him. On top of being without Keanu Pinder. And with 40 really going with a 7-man rotation for most of that series. They put up a great fight given everything that they were coming up against.
Well, they did. And they, you know, put up a heck of a fight against the best team in the league.
Yep.
And, you know, it is tough, and injuries, you know, I've said it before, injuries play such a big part in basketball, and, you know, it really does come down to luck sometimes.
Yeah.
And, look, obviously, we knew Keanu wasn't going to play, but to lose Shannon Scott after that first game really, really hurt them, I think. And, you know, they came out and played really well in Game 2, but, you know, like you said, that 7-man rotation, you just saw they just ran out of legs.
I feel for Keanu Pinder as well. He was pestering Adam Ford for those last 2 games of the series to play.
Yep.
Medical advice suggested that he wasn't quite ready, so I think they made the right decision. But I feel for him for not getting to play. For any media speaking to Keanu in press conferences in the future, please have a look at a photo of who he is first, and don't call him Tajir McCall. That's probably not the best way to win any friends, but I feel for him because he was really excited to come in for the grand final series. He would have been right to play. This 2-week break would have been the best thing ever for him because he would have been fully healthy now by this weekend. Interesting question. Having that burning in the back of his mind, knowing that he desperately wants to help this Taipans team achieve something, but knowing that he has to probably sign the most important contract of his life coming up now in this off season, what do you think he does?
It really is a tough one, and look, it's one of those things that while he obviously wanted to play those 2 games, you know, it's not the best thing to do for his future because you know one hard knock and that sets him back a long time, I think. But look, he's got some big decisions to make. You know, he's game has just elevated 2 straight years now. Obviously, with his back-to-back most valuable player and in one
most
of the
improved.
That's what I meant. Sorry about that. Especially in one of the better leagues in the world, I think that he's got lots of eyes on him now, and I think teams are going to start throwing a lot of money at him from all over the place.
I think including Europe. I think he gets a lot of big offers from Europe and potentially Japan.
Yeah, well, exactly. And there's plenty of money around. So it's going to be interesting to see what he does. And look, if he does decide to go elsewhere to, you know, play in a different country, then, you know, Cairns have got some big decisions to make and how they fill that void.
It's an interesting one because I It's hard to say this for sure, but I feel like the best place for his basketball would be staying in Cairns, but he's going to be able to make more money elsewhere. Yeah. And this could be a life-changing contract that he signs. How do you weigh those two things up?
It is difficult, and I think, as a young player, I reckon that he's done very well to go and play for 40, and I think 40's done an unbelievable job with him to just pump him full of confidence and let him play his game. Yeah.
I think you're right. I think that's the key. He needs these tyres pumped up, whereas I think Conor Henry was trying to do the right thing, but he rode him too hard and he didn't get the best out of him.
And look, in Europe, you're not going to get your tyres pumped up by any stretch of the imagination. You get absolutely destroyed over there from coaches, and it is a tough one. I think that he's at the point now where, his confidence should be at an all-time high, regardless of if, the coach is on you or not. Sure. So I think if there was a time to go and earn some money, I think now would be it. But yeah, it is going to be interesting to see.
The other series between the New Zealand Breakers and the Tasmania Jack Jumpers, when we spoke 2 weeks ago, Cody, we didn't see much hope for the Jack Jumpers to even force it to a Game 3, but they were outstanding in Game 2 at home to really control that game and to turn it back into a Jack Jumpers style of game. So they were outstanding to force it back to a Game 3, but I think the longer we saw Game 3 unfold, the depth of the Breakers really came through, and the quality of their play, their defense was too hard to score against. And then Barry Brown Jr., 32 points in a deciding Game 3 was the difference in the end. The Jack Jumpers didn't quite have an offensive weapon like him, and he caught fire. So it was a fascinating series in the end, which we didn't quite see happening after Game 1.
Yeah, and look, shame on us for not thinking the Jack Jumpers would bounce back, because, they've proven time and time again that, they're the best team in the league at bouncing back after a loss. I think that, they came out and proved, not only us, but probably a lot of people around the country very, very wrong. Look, they put up a valiant effort, and Game 3, again, just taken over by Brown, and he was unbelievable, even with his hand strapped heavily still.
Well, he's doing it with his shooting hand injured. Yeah,
I know. So, look, I think he's going to be a game changer in this next series as well. I think it's going to really come down to how he is able to score against the Kings. And, look, New Zealand's depth was just, stifling, really. Yep. They sub and they don't lose anything. So, which is, been why they've been tough all year, and clearly the second best team in the league.
I think the two things that stood out by the time we got to the Game 3s were that the advantage of finishing top 2 was enormous, because the Kings and the Breakers were so much more fresh than what the Jack Jumpers and the Taipans were by that point, because they'd both had to come through the play-in tournament. But also, we've talked, probably especially in the first half of the season, how there wasn't much of a home court advantage throughout the league, but Game 3 of a deciding series, that is when you do have a home court advantage.
Yeah. Oh, you do, and it's a completely different story, especially in New Zealand.
Yep.
The fans over there are unbelievable, and it's fun to play in front of, even as an opposing fan. So, look, that place looked like it was absolutely rocking, and I think that these is probably, well, for this season anyway, two of the better crowds going at it. So it's going to be fun to see.
All right, Cody. So that's how we got to the grand final. We'll preview it later on in the show. But for now, let's take a deep breath and find out what Matty Knight's got to say about what's happening right now.
Perfect.
Okay, I'm joined by the Nightmare Matty Knight here on Hoop 7's Basketball Hustle, the 3-time NBL champion, the best power forward of his generation. It's been a little while since we caught up, Matty. We're finally getting closer to the championship series starting. How are you holding up?
Yeah, doing well, mate. It's been crazy how big a break it's been. Kind of forgot that the NBL is still happening.
You had the opposite problem during some of your championship series, especially against the Breakers. I remember there was one series where all 3 games of the grand final series was played within 5 days, and when you're travelling between Perth and Auckland, it's not that easy. How would have you handled a 2-week break from your semi-finals to grand final? Would have it been pretty frustrating?
It definitely would have been, because you're on the high of making the grand final, and you just want to go out there and play. Yeah. But then you go 2 weeks more to train and all that. Yeah, you want to play. And I guess that was the best, positive about the series against New Zealand was you just got to play. It was play, travel. Like, whoever was the fittest team at the end won. And, yeah, obviously, it'd be tough as a player having to know you got to wait another 2 weeks before you actually go to play.
Who would have been the worst coach for you to have during a 2-week break? Who would have pushed you the hardest? Would it have been Bevo? Would it have been Trevor Gleeson? Or maybe your coach in Hungary even?
Probably Hungary, but no, both Trev and Bevo are really good. By the end of the year, we're probably on court for an hour max. There wasn't a whole lot more you could really do. Obviously, probably the first week there would have been a couple of longer sessions just to get your touch and all that. But by the end of the season, we're on court an hour max. You've done all the hard work in the pre-season for this time of year, but I'm glad we never had to wait 2 weeks. So.
Yeah. All right, before I get your thoughts on what's going to happen in that grand final series, Matty, looking back on the 2 semi-final series, both went to 3 games, and I think you have to give an enormous amount of credit to both the Jack Jumpers and the Taipans for the fight they put up, but I think ultimately we're probably left with the best 2 teams, with the Kings and the Breakers. What did you make of both of those series?
Yeah, no, full respect to Cairns and Tassie. Both had to play extra games in the Plains. I think Tassie had to play, a lot of them out to Cairns, then over to New Zealand, back home. That's a lot of travelling. And Cairns, they had to do it with all the injuries. Yeah. Obviously losing Scott in game 1, massive. McCall wasn't healthy. It's a lot to ask of DJ Hogue. Obviously no Pinder. The fight they put up, they have full respect to them. They could have easily made excuses, but that's not the way 40 went about it. He had them playing good basketball, and if things were a little different, maybe they could have gone a bit further. But things were out of their control. It probably didn't help them in the end.
You were pretty clear on Adam Ford being Coach of the Year. I think after that series and after what he did to get them that far, to be within 1 game of getting to a grand final, with all the injuries that they had, without their best player, and then without Shannon Scott, who was their floor general as well. I mean, I think Fordy's standing as a coach only went up during this final series. Oh,
definitely. No, you could tell that the Cairns players absolutely love playing for 40. Yeah. He's a great guy. He eats and breathes, sleeps basketball. That was one thing about him when over here at Perth. He was always there if you needed extra sessions or whatnot. He was always there, and he put the players first. And Cairns have really accepted him up there, and they love him up there, and that's every reason too. What he does for that organisation, from where they were last year to now, full credit has to go to 40.
We haven't heard an announcement about him re-signing just yet, but I don't think there's any chance in the world that he doesn't remain as coach of the Taipans, does he?
He's on Cairns. I'm locking him up now.
Yeah.
He loves it up there. Obviously, it's going to be tough trying to keep all those players with the bigger clubs out there, but yeah, I'm on Cairns. I'm locking him up before another team comes knocking on the door.
Oh, for sure.
He's showing what he can do.
Had a couple of weeks now to reflect on the Perth Wildcats season, Matty. It was quite the roller coaster ride, and then in their 2 play-in games, it ended up being another roller coaster ride because they found a way to escape with that 41-point fourth quarter against South East Melbourne, but then they reverted back to a lot of the woes from during the season in that game against Cairns to end their season. After a couple of weeks to reflect, what do you make of their season, and what do you think of their outlook now moving forward?
Yeah, no, obviously they're probably starting to make a playing tournament, but obviously a win over South East Melbourne. You can't really call it a successful season. Jack used to say if it was not a championship, it wasn't a success.
He would tell you that at the season launch every season, wouldn't he?
Yeah, so, but no, I think the roster they have, they probably expect to do more, and I think the fans did as well. I know there was a lot of anger towards Scott Morrison last year and not making the finals. Well, they had a playing tournament last year. He's in the finals. So
I think they had a better record last year, didn't they?
Yeah, they were unlucky with Vic War going down towards the end of the season. Yeah. If he is healthy, then I think they make the playoffs. But I think there needs to be a major adjustment at the Wildcats in terms of the way they play. You can't give up a high-scoring team, but then not even worry about defense. And you look at the roster they had, not too many guys in that roster didn't care about defense.
No, absolutely. What are your thoughts on Todd Blanchfield? I mean, he had the least productive season of his career just because he couldn't get on the court. I mean, and then all of a sudden he comes out for the Boomers and 51 points he scored in the 2 games over this FIBA window in the 2 wins for the Boomers. Clearly, he's got a lot of good basketball still left in the tank. I know he's still contracted for 2 more seasons at the Wildcats, but if you were him, what would you do looking ahead to your future?
Yeah, it's a tough one. Obviously, he went from starter to barely playing and then gone for the last 20 seconds of the last game, which is a whole other story. But he showed if he's in the right system, he can produce. And he's a confidence player. And obviously, going from starting, probably not having the start he wanted, to being benched, not playing, that's, for a guy that relies on confidence, that's not going to help him at all. So he proved under Trev, when Trev had the flex system and all that, in the right system, he flourishes. And obviously the system here in Perth, last couple of years really, probably hasn't helped him. So he shows he's still got a lot to offer. So if I'm Todd, I'm trying to find a system that suits me and actually wants me.
Yeah, I agree. I still think, even though he's giving up guaranteed money, I still think the best thing for him will be to try to get out of his contract, go somewhere that he's happy and will play. I assume if he asked that of the Wildcats, that I imagine they would grant it, because it frees up some money and a roster spot for them as well. So I think it's a win-win for both parties.
You know, if I did knocking on the Cairns and Tassie door,
yep.
Obviously both coaches there are player coaches, and Scott Ross showed what he can do with those type of players, confident players. But some of those guys, Matt Kenyon wasn't in the league before he came in, or was struggling to find a spot.
Yep.
So if I'm Toddy, I'm knocking on the door just asking, is there any spots available?
Well, Cairns as well. I mean, 40 wants you to shoot three-point shots, and that's what Blanchfield is known for.
Exactly. So yeah, I'd be knocking on those doors, just inquiring if they need anything, or yeah.
All right, the Championship Series, Matty, finally gets underway in Sydney this Friday night. Sydney Kings versus the New Zealand Breakers. What are you expecting?
Yeah, no, I'm expecting a close series. 2 top teams, probably deserving to be in the grand final series. Sydney had a tough one against Cairns, and they're going to really need DJ Vasiljevic firing if they have any real chance going back-to-back. It's going to be a great matchup.
He at least has to match what Barry Brown does, doesn't he? Yeah,
and Barry Brown, he's been fantastic for the Breakers coming this final series. And then you got Brantley and Todd inside.
Yeah.
Will McDowell-White's been fantastic all year. So I think, I reckon New Zealand, if they can get game 1, it'll put pressure on, and I think New Zealand can walk away with this in a 5-game series.
I want to get your thoughts on the battle of the big men. Clearly, you're well placed to give some insight into this as one of the best big men in the NBL has ever seen. It's a fascinating matchup. I mean, what Jarrell Brantley and Derek Pardon have done for the Breakers is incredible, but they're up against Tim Suarez and Xavier Cooks. Who do you think gets the better of that matchup?
I think Brantley's a great matchup for Cooks.
Yeah.
He's got the athleticism, speed to match with Cooks, which you can find the right matchup for him and slow him down. That will really help you. But obviously, he's a fantastic player. But I think Pardon is going to be the X factor, and I think Suarez will struggle to guard him.
Yep.
A lot of bigs have this year, and if Pardon can get that around that double every game, I think that'll be a big factor as why New Zealand will win.
Yeah, absolutely. So if I had to pin you down, would you be going for the Breakers in 5 games? Is that where you're leaning?
That's where I'm leaning, yep.
All right, mate. We'll see how it plays out, Matty. Last one before I let you go. Your player of the year, thanks to Hoops Heaven here on the show this season, went to Milton Doyle from the Jack Jumpers. Now, we're yet to hear of any re-signings from the Jack Jumpers, but how desperate would you be for the Jack Jumpers to re-sign him and lock him away for probably multiple seasons?
I could imagine the front office and Scott Ross are on the phone to his agent right now trying to lock him away. Obviously won the MVP down in Tassie as well. So I reckon they'll be doing everything they can to lock him away. He was fantastic for him, and Tassie really love him down there. So I think if you can keep him and the Jet, they'll go a long way to being back as a contender again next year. But hopefully he does stay down there. It'd be great for the state and for the Jack Jumpers to have a player of his standard coming back.
No, it sure will be. All right, Matty, it's been good fun picking your brain and catching up once again. And we'll try and catch up during the Championship Series and see how your predictions are unfolding, and we'll see how it all goes.
Sounds good, Pikey.
Okay, I'm back now with Cody here on Hoop 7's Basketball Hustle. Thank you to Matty Knight for joining us once again and giving his insights. He's predicted the New Zealand Breakers in 5 games, Cody, so that gives you something to work off as we get to your predictions later on. But before we preview the Championship Series between the Kings and the Breakers, let's go back to the South East Melbourne Phoenix coaching situation. It's going to be fascinating how they end up going and what direction they head, because this is the first time they've ever needed a new head coach. Simon Mitchell has been their only head coach up until now in their first 4 seasons. I've broken it down into some different categories. Give me your thoughts on these potential options, and then once we go through them all, Cody, you can tell me what way you think they might head. Yep. I think that absolute top of the tree for them is Brian Goorjian and Trevor Gleeson. I think for different reasons they would have connections to the region. They're the 2 most successful coaches in NBL history, so that speaks for itself. I think Trevor's already ruled out being a legitimate option, but that doesn't mean they can't still throw the absolute truck at him and see if they can still entice him. Gorge has indicated he's not too keen to coach in the NBL again, but again, he's got such a history with the Magic going back to South East Melbourne days. And I think if there's ever a club that could entice him back to the NBL, it could be them. I think they're the absolute top of the tree targets. Yeah. Are either of them a legitimate chance, do you think?
Oh, look, I think, we saw Gleeson knock back a 3-year deal. Yeah. I think once Gorge left the Hawks, I think he was done with the NBL as well. So, look, I think while those 2 are probably would be your main targets, I don't see either of them back this year.
So looking across the league, if they wanted to go for somebody within the league already as an assistant coach or in some sort of role, similar to what the Bullets did with Justin Schuller, I throw Sam McKinnon in there just because he gave an indication that he was really enjoying coaching, but also he's a South East Melbourne basketball legend as well. So he's probably a very outside chance, but I put his name in the mix. But then you've also got Greg Vanderjagt, who I think did a terrific job in the back end of the season at the Bullets. Kevin Lish, you've talked about on this show before how he's a head coach in waiting. Yep. So I think he has to be in consideration. Melbourne United staff seem to always come into these discussions. So Reece Carter is there with a chance. Jacob Chance is another guy who I think was right in the mix at the Brisbane Bullets. So I think he's always going to keep putting his hand up for these jobs. Another South East Melbourne championship winner going back to the 90s, Mike Kelly. I wonder if he might be interested in being a head coach again. And I think Pero Cameron is a head coach in waiting as well. Do any of those names jump out?
Oh, look, I think all of them have a legit case. McKinnon, we've seen, stuck his hand up for that Brisbane job when they were struggling and coached them for a couple games. And look, Vanderjagt obviously just didn't want any part of that Brisbane after what happened with them last year. So I think those 2 are legitimate. Kev, I think, should be certainly one of their first calls as well. I think one of the smartest basketball players and just general basketball IQ going around. But I think if he takes a head coaching role, I think he needs to kind of be able to put his foot down a bit more, just kind of stamp his authority.
Does he have that in his nature? Do you think you can turn that switch?
I think he can. I think he can. You see it on the court.
He was the most competitive player on the court that you will find.
Yeah, exactly. So, look, I think he would be able to flick that switch. Reece Carter, definitely. I think he's certainly in the mix. Jacob Chance, he's been around for a long time now. Been under some really good head coaches. So, I think he's certainly a legitimate chance. Mike Kelly, I think he's proven his worth in the league, and his last stint with Cairns was obviously probably not as successful as they would have liked. But,
It was interesting, wasn't it? Two very poor seasons, but one season where he was coach of the year.
Yeah. So, and look, he knows his stuff as well. He's a really smart coach and knows basketball so well. And Perry Cameron's probably one of the dark horses for me. I think he's one of those guys that popped his head up with that Brisbane job, and he's ready to kind of take over a head coach's role. And look, I think all those guys should be under consideration for sure, and I'd be surprised if they haven't reached out to most of them already.
Some potential big names who are former coaches in the league. Cody, do you think any of these could be a potential? Do you think Aaron Fern would consider coming back to Australia? Sean Dennis, he seems so settled with his family life in Japan, but again, he's another former coach of the year. Andre Lamanis, again, he looks like he's enjoying life in Japan, but he's got a connection with South East Melbourne as well. Paul Hanari, I think, probably feels like he's got unfinished business in the NBL as well. Any of those do you think might be a chance?
It's a tough one. You see guys play or coach, go to Japan, and they just don't come back.
They don't seem to. No.
They don't come back. The leagues over there and just the general living over there is just, from all accounts, unbelievable. So, look, I don't really think you probably draw those guys too much. But I think Paul Hanari is an interesting one because you're right. I think he's got some unfinished business, and I think he would think that and come in with a bit of a chip on his shoulder. And look, I think he probably deserves a chance for sure.
Three more men. Judd Flavel, up until this past season, he was Simon Mitchell's right-hand man at the Phoenix. Yeah. Adam Capehorn, he's turned down jobs previously, as I think including the Adelaide job when Connor Henry departed in that situation. But I know he's settled in the United States, but maybe a head coaching job is something that could entice him back. And Anthony Petrie is another one who's interesting to me. He was in the mix for the Bullets job. Any of those three jump out?
Oh, look, all three of them, I think, again, just legitimate chances. And I think Judd has probably done all he can to try and get a head coaching job. You know, he's been one of the long-lasting assistants of the whole league. And, look, I think he would certainly fit. Capes, it's a tough one. That's a tough one, but you're right, head coaching job would be enticing. But Peach, I think, is a really interesting one because, look, again, one of the most competitive guys that are going around and, proving over the past couple of years that he can coach.
Yep.
And again, he knows his stuff and he knows the league. He knows a lot of the guys around the league and how they play and what it takes to win. So
certainly would have the respect of Mitch Creek.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. So, look, I think he would be a really good option for them.
That's the list I put together, Cody. Do you think there's a real chance that they end up appointing somebody that's not even on my list?
One person that sticks out to me is probably Robbie McKinley, who's at the Institute right now. He was one of my assistants at the Kings, and look, he knows his stuff, and he's one of those guys that has been around for a long time, and just keeps making strides. So I think he's probably one other guy that you haven't listed that I think would be another viable option. But I think you've kind of hit the nail on the head with all those guys.
Is there also a chance because of their NBA connections with their ownership that they go for an American coach and go for somebody totally left field?
Oh, very possibly. I think that, they're one of the teams with probably more connections than anyone else.
Yeah.
So, it wouldn't surprise me if they have someone completely out of left field and, bring an NBA assistant over or something along those lines.
It's risky though, isn't it?
Yep.
We saw it hasn't always worked.
No.
Dean Demopoulos comes to mind at Melbourne United as one that didn't even bother to learn the rules of an NBL game before he started coaching.
No, he did not. And I think with the ownership group that the Phoenix have, I think that they'd be a bit smarter than that, and they'd certainly do their homework and make sure that whoever was coming out would be a legitimate fit.
Watching Mike Kelly have to explain to him the rules of an NBL game during a game and taking up the whole timeouts to do that was quite the experience.
It
Cody.
Sure was. It wasn't ideal, was it?
No. All right, Cody. So we'll see which direction the Phoenix end up going. Big decisions for Tommy Greer and the Phoenix owners to make, but we've got a championship series to look forward to. The Sydney Kings and the New Zealand Breakers. Game 1, Friday night at Kudos Bank Arena, Cody. Let's hope we get a good crowd because not only has the break not been ideal, but now we're competing with the start of the NRL season this week as well. So let's hope the people of Sydney still turn out.
Oh, look, I think they will. They will. You know, they kind of had that bit of an anomaly in that deciding game and had basically half a crowd there from their standards for this year. But look, I think being a championship series, I think that takes precedent for sure.
Yep. So game 2 will then be in Auckland at Spark Arena on the Sunday, and then the following Friday back in Sydney for game 3, game 4 back in Auckland the following Sunday, and then if needed, the following Wednesday will be game 5. You happy with that structure?
Yeah, I think that's probably about as good as you can get. You know, these midweek games aren't really ideal, honestly. So, look, I think if it goes to 5 games, which I do think it will, having a decider on a Wednesday isn't great.
Yeah.
But you don't want to stretch it out for too long because it's already been a long time. So.
No, absolutely. And it might be a positive that it won't clash with an NRL or AFL game on that weekend. So that could be one positive for a Wednesday night. But you're right, if it was on a Friday or Saturday night, it's probably preferred. It's a fascinating series, Cody, and I legitimately find it a toss of the coin to try and work out who's winning. If you go through player for player, the matchups are fascinating. If you go back through their 3 meetings through the season, they were all physical battles. They were fascinating battles. We had Chase Buford come out and talk about how we felt like they were playing against the All Blacks, and you know, Mody Mayor got a little bit defensive, but more recently he's taken that as a badge of honour, and he'd be proud if they were playing like the All Blacks, because both it means they're being physical, which suits them, but also it means they've got under the skin of the Sydney Kings as well. Before I go through some of the matchups, what stands out to you when you think about these two teams playing one another?
Oh, just the matchups everywhere. You know, I think that you've got probably the most physically dominant defensive team in the league in New Zealand against a team that shoots a lot of free throws usually.
Yes,
in the Sydney Kings. So it's gonna be interesting to see how it's officiated. You know, and I don't like talking about it. You know, especially a championship series, like we shouldn't be talking about refs or anything like that. But it is going to come down to that. Yeah. It's going to be interesting to see how physical New Zealand's allowed to be, and you know, vice versa, how physical Sydney's allowed to be on the defensive end as well. But man, the matchups all over the place are lots of fun when you've got it on paper.
Well, if you talk about the physicality, perhaps one of the biggest things, and it's probably not ideal for this to be a big factor, but whether or not Derek Pardon is allowed to set screens or not, and if he is allowed to get away with the screens he sets, is going to be a big factor in how this series plays out. Very
much so. And look, we've seen he kind of toes that line between a legal screen and an illegal screen.
Well,
but,
to be honest, I'm not sure if he does too much different on any of them.
No.
But it just depends on how they're officiating them on the day.
Yeah, you're definitely right. And look, I really hope that they let him play. I really do, because, you know, we saw that New Zealand and Tassie series, and it was a lot of fun to watch because they let him actually play. So, yeah, again, it's frustrating that has to be such a talking point.
Yeah. Well, let's go through the matchup by matchup. So you got the two centres, Tim Suarez and Derek Pardon. The power forward matchup. This is as good as it gets. Xavier Cooks and Jarrell Brantley. The 3-man matchup, I'm fascinated to see who these guys go to end up guarding and what assignments they're given. So Justin Simon and Tom Abercrombie, DJ Vasiljevic and Rayan Repair, but probably most of that matchup will be DJ and Barry Brown. Yep. Then the point guards, Derek Walden Jr. and Will McDowell-White, probably the two best pure playmakers in the league. Yeah. And then you look at how deep the benches go. So the Kings, you got Jordan Hunter, Kwiatnoy, Jalen Galloway, Angus Glover, Sean Bruce. The Breakers have got Rob Lowe, Tom Vodanovich, Cam Glidden, and then, you know, either Barry Brown or Rayan Repair and Isaiah Liafa. I mean, 10v10, that's incredible.
It's awesome. That's great. And I think, you know, it sets it up for an unbelievable series, really, because, you know, both teams probably the deepest in the league. And, you know, they both sub and don't lose anything. Yeah. If anything else, they just gain. You know, they gain a bit of firepower or a bit of defensive energy. It's going to be a fascinating series, and I can't wait for it to start.
Jarrell Brantley has done really well in the matchup so far this season against Xavier Cooks. Yep. How do you see that matchup playing out?
Again, it comes down to how physical he's allowed to be, because you know we've seen the way you kind of, I'm not going to say stop because you don't stop Zave, but the way you slow him down a bit is to be physical with him. You know, he relies on his agility and, you know, his finishes and getting downhill if you can stop him and be a bit more physical with him, Brantley's stronger.
Yep.
Brantley's a lot stronger, a lot bigger body. And look, I think that's going to be such a fun matchup to watch over the whole series.
They do have a similar athleticism too, don't they?
They do. Yeah, they do. Zave's probably that little bit longer and looks that little bit springier, but, Jarrell Brantley certainly can hold his own.
Big defensive jobs for Simon and Abercrombie.
Yeah.
Who do you think they go to?
Look, honestly think they both go to the point guards.
Yeah.
I think that it wouldn't surprise me if you did see Simon on Will McDowell-White and then Abercrombie on Walton, just that bit of length on both of them. And we've seen how both those guys really just set up their teams. And, the team success really is determined off how well they're running the show.
Sure.
So it wouldn't surprise me if those two went to the point guards.
Yeah, I agree. I think Abercrombie absolutely goes to Derek Walton because that extra bit of size and making his life difficult to set up for his teammates will be crucial. Justin Simon, I think, might split his time. They're going to have to put a lot of time into Barry Brown Jr., so I think he might spend some time there. But again, if he can disrupt what McDowell-White can do as the playmaker, it helps keep Barry Brown quiet at the same time.
For sure, exactly. So, and it's one of those things that Barry Brown's probably going to get his, but how does he get it?
Sure.
Does he get it with Will McDowell-White coming off those on balls and probably hitting Rob and Pardon on those little dump offs early and then finding Barry Brown late? Or is it going to be kick it to Barry Brown and just let him go to work? Because that's going to wear him down over the series. So you're right. I think Simon's got a big task ahead of him, and he's got lots to think about.
What is the level of trash talk going to be like between?
Oh my goodness!
Especially DJ Vasiljevic and Barry Brown.
Oh, it's going to be awesome. It's going to be so good. I think everyone in general.
Yeah, sure.
Both teams very chirpy, and both coaches very animated. Yes. I think just across the board, it's going to be lots going on.
What do you make of the coaching matchup? How do you think that plays out?
Yeah, I think it's set up to be one of the better coaching matchups we've seen, and it's going to be interesting to see how close they can get to each other while still yelling at their teams. I think it'll be a race to see who gets the first tech. I think.
Yeah.
But I think
who's your money on?
Chase for sure. I think just with his with especially the last series where he got tossed, I think they're going to be all over that. Yep. But look, Modi flies under the radar. I think he's up and animated, and I think he probably hides it a little better because he does it while yelling at his players.
Yes.
But look, I think it's going to be a really fun matchup as well.
Yep, there's so much to look forward to, Cody. Can't wait for Friday night for Game 1 to see how that plays out. Game 2 on Sunday in Auckland, and then we can come back next week and talk about it and see what adjustments will need to be made for Game 3, Game 4, and possibly even Game 5. So a lot to get through from this week's show, Cody. Thank you for breaking it all down with me once again, and I'll let you wrap it up by not only saying what you're looking forward to, but leave us with a prediction for this championship series.
Look, I'm just looking forward to this whole series. I think it's going to be an unbelievable basketball shown, and over the series. Look, I think New Zealand get them. I think New Zealand get them in 5. But it's gonna be lots of fun. So I can't wait for it to start.